The letter fluttered from Mary Phillips' trembling fingers as she read the news that would forever alter her life's course. April 1873 was proving to be cruel. Her father's passing left her alone in Boston with mounting debts and few prospects for a respectable woman of 22. The advertisement seeking a mail carrier for the rural routes outside Fort Worth, Texas seemed like divine providence, even if the notion of a female postman raised eyebrows throughout polite society. Mary tucked the acceptance letter into her reticule and squared her shoulders. She had 3 weeks to sell what little remained of her father's possessions and purchase a train ticket west. Opportunity awaited in a place where perhaps her past wouldn't follow, a place where she could build something new from the ashes of her former life. The journey west was long and arduous, the landscape growing increasingly wild as the train clattered through territories Mary had only read about in dime novels. When she finally stepped onto the platform in Fort Worth, Texas, the May heat hit her like a physical blow. Her traveling dress, practical by Boston standards, felt stifling in the southwestern sun. "Miss Phillips?" A gruff voice called over the station's bustle. Mary turned to find an older gentleman with a weathered face and kind eyes. He tipped his hat respectfully. "Postmaster Williams." "Pleasure to meet you in person. Hope your journey wasn't too taxing." "It was quite manageable, thank you," Mary replied, though her aching back and exhaustion suggested otherwise. "Most folks were expecting a man," Williams said bluntly as he helped load her trunks onto a wagon. "The advertisement didn't specify otherwise." "Will that be a problem?" Mary asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Williams chuckled. "Might be for some, but the mail needs delivering, and you were the only one who responded with proper credentials. Your father's postal background served you well." As they rode through Fort Worth, Mary took in the dusty streets, wooden storefronts, and the mix of proper townsfolk and rough-looking cowboys. This was a town straddling wilderness and civilization, nothing like the refined streets of Boston. The room above the post office was small but clean. Mary arranged her meager possessions, setting a photograph of her parents on the bedside table. Tomorrow, she would begin her new role delivering mail to the scattered homesteads and ranches surrounding Fort Worth. "Your route covers mostly the North and West Territories," Williams explained over breakfast the following morning. "Some 20 miles of trail altogether with about 15 regular stops." He handed her a map with marks indicating each delivery point. "The furthest is Kestrel Ranch, owned by a fellow named Ross Kingsley. Only been out there twice myself. Man keeps to himself, has a young son. Wife passed during childbirth few years back." Mary's fingers traced the route as she committed it to memory. "How often will I make deliveries?" "Twice weekly to start, Mondays and Thursdays. We'll supply the horse and mail pouch, though I recommend you carry protection." He nodded toward a cabinet where several pistols were stored. Mary had never fired a gun in her life but nodded resolutely. She couldn't appear weak on her very first day. The following morning dawned bright and clear. Mary dressed in the practical riding outfit she'd commissioned before leaving Boston, split skirts that allowed her to ride astride, a light blouse, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun. With the mail pouch secured to her saddle and a small pistol tucked into her belt, she set out on her first delivery route. The initial stops were relatively close to town, a general store owner expecting business correspondence, a schoolteacher receiving letters from family back east, a rancher's wife eagerly awaiting a package of sewing supplies. Each recipient regarded Mary with a mixture of surprise and curiosity, but most were welcoming enough. As she ventured further from town, the landscape grew wilder. Rolling hills covered in scrub brush stretched toward distant mesas. The late morning heat shimmered off the ground, and Mary was grateful for her water canteen. By midday, she had completed most deliveries, with only the 2 most remote stops remaining. According to her map, the next was Kestrel Ranch, the home of the widower and his son. The trail leading to the property narrowed considerably, winding through a rocky pass, before opening onto a vista overlooking a modest valley. The ranch house sat nestled against a backdrop of cottonwood trees beside a small creek. A corral held several horses, and cattle grazed in a distant pasture. As Mary approached, she noticed how well maintained the property appeared despite its isolation. She was tethering her horse to the hitching post when the front door swung open. A boy of about 7 emerged, regarding her with undisguised curiosity. "Hello," Mary called, offering a friendly smile. "I'm the new mail carrier from Fort Worth." The boy stared wordlessly, then turned and disappeared into the house, calling, "Pa, there's a lady here with mail." Moments later, a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he was in his early 30s. Those eyes, a startling blue against his weathered skin, studied Mary with intensity. "Afternoon," he said finally, stepping onto the porch. "You're the mail carrier, Mary Phillips," she confirmed, extending her hand professionally. "Mr. Kingsley, I presume." He hesitated before accepting her handshake. His palm was rough with calluses. "Ross Kingsley. This is unexpected. Fort Worth sending women to make deliveries now." "Just this woman," Mary replied evenly. She reached into her pouch and extracted several letters bound together with twine. "Your mail, sir." Ross accepted the bundle, his expression still guarded. "Appreciate it. Been waiting on correspondence from the cattle buyers in Kansas City." The boy reappeared at his father's side, staring openly at Mary. "This is my son, Daniel," Ross said, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Mary smiled warmly at the child. "Pleased to meet you, Daniel. I'll be bringing your mail twice weekly from now on." The boy remained silent, but his eyes were bright with interest. "Would you care for water before continuing your route?" Ross asked, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "Creek water's clean here." Mary realized how parched she felt. "That would be most welcome, thank you." Ross disappeared inside, returning with a tin cup of cool water. As Mary drank gratefully, she noticed him examining her attire and horse with an appraising eye. "Long ride back to town," he observed. "You carrying protection?" Mary patted the small pistol at her belt. Postmaster Williams insisted. A ghost of a smile touched Ross's lips. "Good man." "Know how to use it?" "I'm a quick study," she replied, not quite answering the question. Ross nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Trail gets tricky about 2 miles east of here. Flash floods carved a new gully last spring. Follow the high ground by the lightning-struck oak." "Thank you for the advice." "I should continue if I'm to complete my route before dusk." As Mary mounted her horse, she felt the weight of Ross Kingsley's gaze. The boy, Daniel, gave a small wave, which Mary returned with a smile. "We'll see you Thursday then," Ross said, his tone somewhere between a question and a statement. "Thursday," Mary confirmed, turning her horse toward the trail. The ride back to town gave Mary time to reflect on the curious father and son at Kestrel Ranch. There was something in Ross Kingsley's manner, a guardedness beyond mere surprise at seeing a female mail carrier. And the boy, so quiet and watchful. Williams had mentioned the mother died in childbirth, which meant Daniel had grown up without a maternal influence. The thought tugged at Mary's heart. Over the next few weeks, Mary settled into her new routine. The citizens along her route grew accustomed to her presence, and many looked forward to her visits, particularly those in the more isolated homesteads. For some, she was their only regular contact with the outside world. Her stops at Kestrel Ranch remained brief, but gradually grew less formal. Daniel began to wait for her arrival, sometimes perched on the fence post, sometimes helping his father with chores nearby. The boy rarely spoke, but would watch her intently as she exchanged pleasantries with Ross. Ross himself remained polite but reserved. He would occasionally offer information about trail conditions or mention if he was expecting important correspondence. Mary noticed he was unfailingly neat, despite the demands of ranch work, his shirt always tucked in, boots cleaned of the worst mud, hair combed back from his forehead. It was during her 4th week of deliveries when circumstances forced a change in their established pattern. Mary arrived at Kestrel Ranch under darkening skies, the air heavy with impending rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance as she handed Ross his mail. "Storm's coming fast," he observed, scanning the horizon with concern. "Might be safer to wait it out here." As if in response, lightning flashed, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Mary's horse whinnied nervously. "I should try to make it back to town," she said, glancing uneasily at the menacing clouds. Ross shook his head firmly. "Creek crossing will be dangerous with flash flooding. Better not risk it." Another lightning strike illuminated the gathering darkness, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Mary reluctantly conceded to logic. "If you're certain it's no imposition." "None at all," Ross replied, helping her untie her horse. "Daniel, open the barn doors for Miss Phillips' mount." The boy sprang into action, clearly excited by this break in routine. Within minutes, Mary found herself inside the ranch house as rain pounded against the roof. The interior was modest but surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a well-worn sofa and 2 chairs arranged nearby. Bookshelves lined one wall, unexpected in a remote ranch house. The kitchen area was clean and organized, with a cast-iron stove and wooden table set with 3 chairs. "Please sit," Ross gestured toward the table. "I can make coffee." "That would be lovely," Mary said, removing her damp hat. She noticed Daniel watching her with open curiosity. "Do you enjoy reading, Daniel? I see you have quite a collection of books." The boy nodded, venturing a rare response. "Pa reads to me every night." Ross busied himself with the coffee pot, but Mary caught the softness in his expression at his son's words. "My father did the same for me," Mary shared. "What stories do you enjoy most?" "Adventures," Daniel answered, growing animated, "and animal stories." The storm intensified outside, rain lashing against the windows as thunder crashed overhead. Mary found herself grateful for the shelter and unexpected company. As Ross served coffee, Daniel retrieved a book from the shelf and hesitantly approached her. "Would you read some?" he asked, holding out a well-loved copy of the Swiss Family Robinson. Mary glanced at Ross, who nodded his permission. "We're about halfway through," he explained. "Evening readings are ritual." For the next hour, as the storm raged outside, Mary read aloud from the adventure tale. Daniel sat rapt with attention, occasionally interrupting with questions or observations. Ross listened from his chair, his expression softening as the evening progressed. When Daniel began to yawn, Ross stood. "Time for bed, son." The boy looked disappointed but didn't argue. "Will Miss Phillips still be here tomorrow?" "I'm sure she'll need to continue her route once the storm passes," Ross explained gently. "But she can have breakfast with us, right?" Daniel persisted, turning hopeful eyes toward Mary. "If the creek's still high, she might have to," Ross conceded. "We'll see in the morning." After Daniel's bedtime preparations, Ross returned to the main room where Mary sat watching the fire. "He's a wonderful boy," Mary said softly. Ross nodded, pride evident in his expression. "He is quiet with strangers, but he's taken to you quickly." "Children can often sense when someone genuinely cares," Mary replied. She hesitated before adding, "It must be challenging raising him alone out here." A shadow passed across Ross's face. "His mother, Elizabeth, died bringing him into this world. Sometimes I wonder if I've done right by him, keeping him so isolated." "He seems happy and well cared for," Mary observed. "Many children in crowded cities have far less attention and love." Ross studied her thoughtfully. "What brought you out here, Miss Phillips?" "Mail carrying isn't a common occupation for a woman from the East." Mary considered how much to share. "My father died this spring. He worked for the Postal Service in Boston for 30 years. I grew up helping him sort mail, learning routes. When he passed, I found myself with few options and mounting debts." She met Ross's gaze steadily. "The advertisement specified experience with postal operations, not gender. I applied and Postmaster Williams accepted." "Bold move," Ross commented, respect evident in his tone. "Necessary move," Mary corrected. "Sometimes circumstances force us down unexpected paths." Ross nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My wife and I came from St. Louis, had plans to build something grand here after she died." He glanced around the modest home. This became enough. For Daniel's sake. The conversation continued as the storm gradually subsided. Mary learned that Ross had been a successful horse trader before purchasing the ranch. He'd named it Kestrel after Elizabeth's favorite bird. Daniel had his mother's eyes and gentle nature, but his father's determination. In turn, Mary shared stories of Boston, her father's dedication to postal service, and her mother's early death from influenza when Mary was 16. She omitted the scandal that had followed her father's, passing the discovery of gambling debts that had tarnished his reputation and left her nearly destitute. When Mary finally retired to the small guest room, she felt a strange sense of belonging she hadn't experienced since before her father's death. The isolation of Kestrel Ranch, which had seemed so stark upon her first visit, now held a certain appeal. The peace of the land, the simple rhythms of ranch life, and the quiet dignity with which Ross faced his responsibilities. Morning brought clear skies, but confirmation of Ross's prediction: the creek had swollen beyond safe crossing. After a breakfast of sourdough biscuits and bacon, during which Daniel chattered more than Mary had heard previously, Ross saddled his horse. "I'll guide you to the high crossing," he explained. "It's a longer route back to town, but safer after a storm." Mary sent a message to Postmaster Williams with another traveler they encountered, explaining her delay. The alternative route took them through stunning landscapes, rocky bluffs, hidden valleys, and a high meadow filled with wildflowers. "It's beautiful," Mary commented as they paused to rest the horses. "I've never seen country like this." "That's why Elizabeth fell in love with it," Ross said quietly. "Said it felt like the world was still being created out here." As they continued toward town, Mary found herself drawn to the strength and quiet dignity Ross embodied. He was a man who had faced profound loss, yet continued to build a life of meaning for his son. There was nothing frivolous or pretentious about him, qualities Mary had grown weary of in Boston society. For his part, Ross seemed to appreciate Mary's practical nature and easy rapport with Daniel. By the time they reached the outskirts of Fort Worth, something subtle had shifted between them. Their formal politeness had given way to a comfortable companionship. "Thank you for your hospitality," Mary said as they prepared to part ways in town. "Thank you for the reading," Ross replied. "Daniel hasn't been that engaged in quite some time. He's a special boy, you should be proud." Ross nodded, then added somewhat hesitantly, "We traditionally attend Sunday services in town once a month, this Sunday coming. Perhaps we'll see you there." Mary smiled, recognizing the gesture for what it was: an invitation to see them outside the context of her mail route. "I would like that very much." In the weeks that followed, Mary's visits to Kestrel Ranch became highlights of her route. Daniel would often meet her at the property boundary, eager to tell her about a new calf, a bird's nest he'd discovered, or a chapter his father had read the previous evening. Ross gradually revealed more of himself: his knowledge of literature, his skill with horses, his hopes for expanding the ranch once Daniel was older. Their interactions at Sunday services allowed the town to see them together in a socially acceptable context. Some of the local women began inviting Mary to quilting circles and socials, pleased to have a new unmarried woman in their midst, while simultaneously assessing her growing friendship with the widowed rancher. Mary found herself thinking of Ross during quiet moments at the boarding house. His integrity, his devotion to Daniel, and yes, the way his blue eyes crinkled when he allowed himself to smile fully, all occupied her thoughts more than was proper for a mere acquaintance. Summer gave way to autumn, bringing cooler temperatures and earlier sunsets. Mary's Thursday deliveries to Kestrel Ranch now meant returning to town near dusk. On one such evening in late September, disaster struck. Mary was halfway back to Fort Worth when her horse stumbled in a prairie dog hole, throwing her forcefully to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. The horse, thankfully uninjured, remained nearby, but Mary found herself unable to remount with her injured limb. Night was approaching rapidly. Mary calculated her options. She could spend the night on the prairie, exposed to the elements and potential predators, or attempt to hobble several miles back to Kestrel Ranch. The decision was clear, if difficult. Using her horse as support, Mary began the painful journey back toward the ranch. Darkness fell completely before she'd covered half the distance. The moon provided some light, but progress was agonizingly slow. It was well past midnight when Mary finally glimpsed the faint glow of a lantern in the distance. As she drew closer, she realized someone was on horseback, methodically searching the trail. "Hello," she called, her voice hoarse from thirst. The rider turned sharply in her direction, then urged his mount forward. Within moments, Ross Kingsley's worried face appeared in the lantern light. "Mary," he breathed, relief evident in his voice. It was the first time he'd used her given name. "When you didn't return to town, Williams sent word. I've been searching for hours." "My horse stumbled," Mary explained, suddenly exhausted now that help had arrived. "My ankle, I don't think it's broken, but I couldn't manage to ride." Without hesitation, Ross dismounted and gently examined her injury. "Badly sprained," he concluded. "You shouldn't have put weight on it." His tone held concern rather than reproach. "I had limited options," Mary replied with a weak smile. "You're half frozen," Ross observed, noticing her trembling. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before lifting her carefully onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist, and led her horse with his free hand. The closeness was intimate beyond anything Mary had experienced. She could feel the steady rhythm of Ross's heartbeat against her back, the warmth of him dispelling the night's chill. Neither spoke during the ride back to the ranch, both acutely aware of the propriety they were breaching out of necessity. At the ranch house, a neighbor woman sat with the sleeping Daniel. Ross had wisely arranged for proper supervision before setting out on his search. The woman helped Mary to the guest room while Ross stabled the horses. "You rest that ankle, Miss Phillips," the older woman instructed kindly. "I'm Mrs. Abernathy from the next property. I'll stay until morning to maintain appearances." She winked conspiratorially. "Though everyone knows Ross Kingsley is a gentleman through and through." Mary blushed, but was grateful for the woman's presence, which would prevent any gossip about her overnight stay. In the morning, Ross sent a ranch hand to inform Postmaster Williams of Mary's situation. Williams himself arrived by midday with the doctor from Fort Worth. The diagnosis confirmed Ross's assessment a severe sprain that would require at least 2 weeks of minimal weight bearing. "You can't possibly manage your route," Williams stated firmly. "I'll have to find temporary replacement." "I can't afford to lose the position," Mary protested, fear rising at the thought of losing her livelihood. "No one's replacing you permanently," Williams assured her, "but you need time to heal properly." Ross, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Miss Phillips can convalesce here if she wishes. Mrs. Abernathy has agreed to stay as companion to ensure propriety. The doctor can check her progress without requiring difficult transport to town." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "Seems sensible if Miss Phillips agrees." All eyes turned to Mary, who found herself torn between practicality and awareness of how this arrangement might appear to others. But the thought of the cramped boarding house room, with its steep staircase and limited comforts, made the decision easier. "I would be grateful for such an arrangement, provided I'm not imposing," she said finally, and so began a fortnight that would change the course of Mary's life. Initially confined to the guest room, she gradually began joining the household for meals, with Mrs. Abernathy's help. Daniel was delighted by her extended presence, bringing her wildflowers and interesting stones he discovered during his explorations of the ranch. Ross ensured her comfort without hovering, respectful of her independence even while confined by injury. In the evenings, after Daniel was asleep, they would often sit on the porch if weather permitted, or by the fire during cooler nights. Their conversations deepened, touching on hopes, disappointments, and the unexpected directions life had taken them both. "I never imagined myself here," Mary admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "A year ago, I was attending literary circles and helping my father organize his stamp collection." "Do you regret coming west?" Ross asked, his voice quiet. Mary considered the question honestly. "No," she said finally. "There was nothing left for me in Boston after my father died. Here I've found purpose, independence." "And isolation," Ross added perceptively. "Yes," Mary acknowledged, "though perhaps less so recently." She met his gaze briefly before looking back at the horizon. Ross was silent for several moments. "When Elizabeth died, I withdrew from everything except Daniel and this land. It seemed easier than facing the world without her." "That's understandable," Mary said softly. "It was necessary at first," Ross continued, "but I've come to realize that isolation isn't the answer. Daniel needs more than just me. He needs community connection." He paused, then added quietly, "As do I." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. As Mary's ankle healed and her mobility improved, she began helping with small household tasks, mending Daniel's clothes, organizing the bookshelves, and teaching the boy basic arithmetic during the afternoons. The rhythm of ranch life grew familiar and comforting. Mrs. Abernathy, a widow herself with grown children, observed the developing situation with knowing eyes. "He hasn't looked at anyone that way since his wife passed," she confided to Mary during one of their private moments. "You've brought light back into this home." Mary felt her cheeks warm. "We're simply friends. His kindness during my recovery has been neighborly compassion, nothing more." The older woman smiled knowingly but didn't press further. By the time the doctor pronounced Mary fit to resume her duties, she found herself reluctant to leave the ranch. The thought of returning to her solitary room above the post office held little appeal after the warmth and companionship she'd experienced at Kestrel. On her final evening at the ranch, Ross invited Mary to walk with him to the creek after Daniel was asleep. Mrs. Abernathy, still maintaining her chaperone duties, watched from the porch as they strolled within proper sight but beyond earshot. The October air held a crispness that promised winter would arrive soon. Overhead, stars sparkled in a clear sky, and a nearly full moon illuminated the landscape in silver light. "Daniel will miss your daily presence," Ross said as they reached the creek bank. "He's grown quite attached." "I'll miss him too," Mary replied, her voice catching slightly. "These weeks have been special." Ross turned to face her directly. "It's not just Daniel who'll feel your absence." Mary's heart quickened. "Ross, I know this is forward," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "And perhaps premature, but these weeks have shown me what Kestrel could be, what my life and Daniel's could be with you in it. I've come to care deeply for you both," Mary admitted, allowing herself to voice feelings she'd kept guarded. Ross took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not asking for immediate answers. I understand you value your independence, your position. I'm simply asking if you might consider a future where our paths join more permanently." Mary was momentarily speechless. She had entertained such thoughts privately, but hadn't dared hope Ross shared them. "I would need to continue working, at least for a time," she said finally. "I can't simply abandon the commitment I made to Postmaster Williams." A smile touched Ross's lips. "I would expect nothing less from you. Your sense of duty is one of the qualities I most admire." "Then yes," Mary said, finding certainty in the moment. "I would very much like to consider such a future." Ross's expression transformed with joy. Mindful of Mrs. Abernathy's distant presence, he raised Mary's hand to his lips in a gesture both proper and deeply meaningful. "May I call on you formally in town, perhaps Sunday dinner after services?" "I would like that very much," Mary replied, her smile matching his. Mary returned to her postal duties the following week, but everything felt different. Her stops at Kestrel Ranch remained professional during mail delivery, but the shared glances and Daniel's exuberant greetings held new meaning. Ross began appearing in town more frequently, often timing his business to coincide with Mary's presence. Their courtship progressed with proper decorum but unmistakable intent. Ross joined Mary for Sunday dinners at her landlady's table. Mary occasionally accompanied Ross and Daniel on Saturday outings to nearby attractions, a county fair, a traveling circus that passed through Fort Worth, a community harvest festival. The townsfolk observed the developing relationship with general approval. Ross Kingsley was respected as a hardworking rancher and devoted father, while Mary had proven herself capable and kind during her months delivering mail to the community. As December approached, bringing holiday preparations and colder weather, Ross invited Mary to join them for Christmas at Kestrel Ranch. Mrs. Abernathy would again serve as companion, along with her grown daughter's family who would be visiting from Dallas. "It's our first real Christmas celebration since Elizabeth passed," Ross explained as they walked together after church one Sunday. Daniel is beside himself with excitement. I would be honored, Mary replied, though I must warn you my cooking skills are rudimentary at best. Ross chuckled. Mrs. Abernathy has the meal well in hand. She's been planning the menu for weeks. Christmas at Kestrel Ranch proved magical beyond Mary's expectations. The house was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons. A small tree stood in the corner, adorned with paper ornaments Daniel had crafted with Mary's help during her convalescence. The gathering was lively but intimate. Ross and Daniel, Mary, Mrs. Abernathy, and her family. Gifts were exchanged, carols sung around the fireplace, and stories shared long into the evening. When the other guests retired to the barn's converted loft space, Ross asked Mary to remain by the fire for a moment. Daniel had fallen asleep on the sofa, exhausted from the day's excitement. I have one more gift, Ross said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box hand-carved with delicate kestrel birds in flight. I made this during the evenings after you returned to town. Mary accepted the box with trembling fingers, admiring the craftsmanship before carefully opening the lid. Inside lay a simple gold band with a small pearl. It was my mother's, Ross explained softly. Mary Phillips, these past months have shown me that life holds second chances for those brave enough to take them. You've brought light back to Kestrel Ranch, joy to my son, and love to my heart when I believed that chapter of my life was finished. He took her hand gently. Would you do us the honor of becoming my wife, Daniel's mother and mistress of Kestrel Ranch? Tears welled in Mary's eyes. Yes, she whispered. With all my heart, yes. The sleeping boy on the sofa stirred at her words, blinking owlishly at the scene before him. Miss Mary, are you crying? Mary laughed through her tears. Happy tears, Daniel. Your father has asked me to marry him. Daniel sat up immediately, fully awake. Really, you'll be my mother, if you'd like that, Mary said carefully. The boy launched himself from the sofa, throwing his arms around Mary's neck. It's the best Christmas present ever. Over Daniel's head, Mary met Ross's gaze. His blue eyes shone with a happiness that mirrored her own. In this moment, in this place so far from where she'd begun, Mary had found home. The wedding took place on a bright April day in 1874, almost exactly 1 year after Mary had received the letter offering her the mail carrier position. The ceremony was held at Kestrel Ranch, with wildflowers decorating the porch where they exchanged vows before the traveling minister. Mary wore a simple ivory dress made by Mrs. Abernathy and the women of the quilting circle. Daniel stood proudly beside his father, responsible for the rings. Postmaster Williams gave the bride away, having become a father figure to Mary during her time in Fort Worth. The celebration afterward brought together the scattered residents of Mary's mail route ranchers and farmers, shopkeepers and schoolteachers, all connected by the young woman who had faithfully delivered their correspondence through seasons of heat, rain, and occasional danger. As husband and wife shared their first dance under lantern light in the ranch yard, Ross whispered, "Did you ever imagine your life would lead you here when you first rode up this trail?" Mary shook her head, smiling up at him. "Never, but now I can't imagine it leading anywhere else." "No regrets about giving up your independence?" he asked, a hint of genuine concern in his voice. "I haven't given it up," Mary corrected gently. "I've shared it. There's a difference." She glanced toward Daniel, who was proudly showing wedding guests the new calf born just days earlier. "Besides, I gained a family. That's worth everything." Mary did continue her postal duties for 6 more months, with Ross occasionally accompanying her on the more distant deliveries. When winter approached, she relinquished the position to a young man recently arrived from Tennessee. By then, Mary had become indispensable at Kestrel Ranch, managing the household accounts with skill acquired from her father, expanding the vegetable garden, and beginning a small poultry operation that soon produced eggs for both home use and sale in town. Daniel flourished under Mary's maternal care. His natural curiosity found nurturing in her patient teaching, and his reserved nature blossomed into confident expression. Ross watched the transformation with gratitude, often finding excuses to observe Mary and Daniel together, heads bent over a book, hands working together on a project, voices raised in shared laughter. The first anniversary of their wedding brought another blessing. Mary was expecting a child. The news filled the ranch with renewed joy and anticipation. Ross was particularly attentive, ensuring Mary didn't overexert herself while respecting her determination to maintain her regular activities as long as possible. Daniel approached impending big brotherhood with earnest preparation, saving special toys and practicing reading stories aloud for the baby to hear. On a snowy January morning in 1876, Mary gave birth to a healthy son they named William Thomas Kingsley. Unlike the tragedy that had marked Daniel's birth, this delivery proceeded smoothly under the care of both the town doctor and an experienced midwife. When Ross first held his second son, with Daniel peering curiously at his new brother and Mary watching her family with tired contentment, the circle felt complete. The lonely widower and his quiet son had found their match in the determined young woman who had once delivered mail to their isolated ranch. And she, seeking only independence and survival after loss, had discovered a love and belonging beyond her imagination. As spring returned to Kestrel Ranch, bringing new calves, fresh grass, and wildflowers, the family settled into expanded rhythms. Mary often sat on the porch in the evening, nursing baby William while watching Ross and Daniel tend to final evening chores. These quiet moments filled her with profound gratitude for the unexpected path her life had taken. One such evening, as sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues, Ross joined her on the porch, Daniel following with a book tucked under his arm. Happy? Ross asked, his hand resting gently on Mary's shoulder. She looked up at him, then at the boys, one dozing at her breast, one settling against his father's side with his cherished book. More than I ever believed possible, she answered truthfully. Not too isolated out here. He teased gently, knowing her answer but asking nonetheless. Mary smiled, remembering her first impression of Kestrel Ranch and its seemingly solitary occupants. This isn't isolation, she said softly. This is belonging. As darkness settled over the ranch and stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, the family moved indoors to the warmth of their hearth. The light from their windows glowed like a beacon across the prairie, no longer a lonely ranch, but a home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of tomorrow. In the years that followed, Kestrel Ranch prospered under the Kingsleys' stewardship. 2 more children joined the family, a daughter, Elizabeth Rose, born in 1878, and another son, James, in 1881. Daniel grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's strength and his stepmother's compassion, eventually attending college in Austin before returning to help expand the family business. Mary never regretted trading her mail pouch for family life. The independence she had sought in becoming a mail carrier found fulfillment in the partnership she built with Ross, each contributing their strengths, supporting each other's dreams, and creating a legacy of love that would sustain them through all of life's seasons. The trail that had once seemed so daunting to a Boston postman's daughter became the path home, a journey that began with delivering mail to a lonely ranch and ended with the delivery from loneliness they had offered each other.